If Vladimir Putin thought he had to worry about a lot in his war with Ukraine, with the Ukraine army as his main enemy, or maybe with the NATO alliance and all of the support from the European countries, if he thought maybe that was really his biggest enemy, no, as it turns out, he has an even bigger one, and something that should be having him quake in his Russian boots: the United States Senate and the U.S. Congress writ large. At least that's the claim by a couple of U.S. senators who went to Kiev yesterday, and that was Senator Richard Blumenthal and our favorite Senator Lindsey Graham. Yeah, I think a lot of our favorite viewers here, you know where this one's going to end up going, but it's going to go in some directions that even you may be surprised about. But I'll tell you, somebody who's not surprised, and that is Vladimir Putin. And what troubles me about this, and one of the reasons we're highlighting this today, is this just continues a very long and sordid track record of failure on the U.S. part, which is saturated in arrogance and presumption and remains blind to the results of that arrogance and can't see how it never accomplishes the objectives with which it's being applied, and equally blind, maybe more so, to the cost it imposes on us and our allies to keep going down this path of too much hubris. And let's just jump right into it here. This is, I'm going to show you, first of all, something from Senator Blumenthal. And listen, this is going to be, this is cringeworthy here just on the surface of it, because he's going to be going down a path here that is, violates one of the things we love to throw in everybody's face internationally all the time. We are a rules-based country. We govern ourselves by the rule of law, the international order, all that kind of stuff that we talk about all the time. The rules-based order, I think, is the phrase they use all the time. And we want everybody to stick with that and to do what we say, because that's the right thing to do. And then there's this. Now, let me put that in English for you. We're going to steal Russian money because they're in Western banks that we have access to, and we can. There's a reason why now we're well into the fourth year of this war. Why that hasn't happened so far is because, as much as we demonize Russia, at least up to this point, the West has recognized that it's illegal. And we don't want to set a precedent of going and stealing the sovereign funds of someone who trusted us by putting their money in Western banks. Because so far, we have realized that to do that is, number one, it just undercuts all the moral arguments we always claim about following the rule of law. And then secondly, it cuts confidence by people in nations all over the world. It's like, hey, don't put your money in a Western bank, because if you do and you run afoul later on of whatever's popular in these Western capitals, they can just take it. So it's not very safe. And then perversely, what he doesn't realize is that this just gives more and more impetus to the BRICS and their alternative economic or arrangement that they're trying to put in as a counterweight to the West. Because their claim, the BRICS countries, China, Russia, Brazil, India, et cetera, they're all saying, hey, put your money here, because we're not going to take the stuff. We're not going to tell you how to do your business. We're about economics. We're about just having deals with various people, having good trade relations, win-win outcomes. They talk about all that stuff, and your money's safe here. Now, certainly since World War II, the Western economic model has been the bulwark of global advancement. And so countries all over the world have eagerly put their money into the West because they have trusted it, and many have benefited because of it. But now in these days, they're seeing more and more red flags, and more countries are seeing this. That's why BRICS is growing as it has, even with some European countries now wanting to get involved, even with some NATO countries wanting to get involved, Turkey being the most recent one. And the more these kinds of things happen, and then especially if Blumenthal makes good on this thread, and the rest of the European countries back it up, and they literally steal against our own laws their sovereign fund here, and then just use whatever pretext they want to. It doesn't matter what they say. We're not at war with Russia. We claim we're not at war with Russia. We say, everybody, we're not at war with Russia. We're just helping Ukraine, and that's what we're trying to do. But the fact is, and well, even on that fact alone, if you are true and you're not at war with Russia, you have no justification to steal their economic funds. You just don't. There's nothing in international law that will allow that. And anyone who wants to try and twist the law into saying something else is really wasting a lot of time, because if you're going to twist the law, there is no law. There's just whatever we say. And you have the capacity that the West can do it. They can take that money, but at a potentially great, great cost, far more than just I think it's around 300 billion US dollars. It's just not worth it, folks. That you've been right not to do it up to this point. Don't go any further. Okay, well, Blumenthal wasn't finished there. Now then he turns around and tells that Putin better be quaking in his boot at 82 U.S. senators. A gas station. I mean, let's just insult Russia left and right and just talk about how we're the king of the hill and they're these little guys and all that. I mean, that's one of the oldest pejoratives against Russia. They're just a gas station with nukes. That's what I've heard that for many years, especially before this war started. Don't know that you want to be making that argument now, because not only are they growing economically, not only are they growing diplomatically and engaging around the world and growing in respect and admiration, even in some quarters of the world, especially in the global South, but their military itself is far, far stronger than it was in February 2022 when this war started. So to have that demeaning comment there that, yeah, Putin better be afraid of 82 U.S. senators. He has no idea what he's talking about. That's not validated by the facts on the ground. And, this whole thing about the bone crushing and crippling sanctions. We're going to get to that in a minute, but they just have this arrogance and this presumption. That's why I talk about this hubris that underlies. He actually still believes that we can get that done. And of course, he's not alone. His partner in crime there, Lindsey Graham, wanted to throw his own accusations at Putin and his own threats. Lindsey Graham is going to say, but I tell you what, Vlad, we don't have to go down this path. There's a hard way, but there's also an easy way. All you have to do is surrender from a position of strength with all the dominant position militarily, economically, industrially, diplomatically, all those things. All you got to do is surrender, and we're not going to put any sanctions on you. We don't have to go down the hard way. Do yourself a favor. That's what he's saying. And you just got to wonder what is in your mind? What can you conceive is on the other side of this equation, on the receiving end of your words from the Kremlin? What do you think that Russia, President Vladimir Putin, is sitting there thinking? That is he going, darn it, those U.S. senators and men, especially the Congress people, they're at a table. They get to play cards here. It's not just me and Putin or me and Trump. It's also those darn congressmen, and they scare me. I mean, does he think that? Or is this just for a domestic audience? You can be tempted to think this is just for domestic audiences. Maybe it is, but what worries me more is that maybe it isn't. Maybe at least to some degree, he actually thinks that they have that kind of power that's going to cause the leader of the country with the largest nuclear weapon stockpile on the planet is going to actually go weak in the knees because of something that the U.S. Legislative branch has to say. I mean, that branch that can't get hardly anything done, that everybody in America knows is just almost this feckless group. Clown show seems to be the most common pejorative I see applied to the U.S. Congress in the last number of years because of how little they get done domestically. And then he's thinking that maybe that Putin will be bamboozled and that he's going to, go down this path. And, and you talk about Blumenthal is talking about seizing assets and these sanctions that Graham's talking about. And, who's the recipient of that money? First of all, they want to say it's Ukraine. We're going to use it to weapons, but he said to buy weapons. Now, where do you suppose that money's going to go? That's going to go to primarily American arms manufacturers. So we'll get more deals, sell more bombs, more bullets, more missiles, all that kind of stuff. That's the one right there. They're still, that's from, I think, December 23. They're still smiling. I don't think their smiles have gone by. When they saw, I bet you if you got all those guys together and they were watching Lindsey Graham's comments, that's probably the identical picture that would be painted again today. They would all be big smiles and talking about, yay, let's go and spend more money, make more money rather for us. And who really cares what happens to the Ukrainians? Yeah, we're not worried about that. But then if we stop the video right here, you would just have to maybe not even just roll your eyes because it would be worse than that. You'd say, what is wrong with this guy here? Well, unfortunately, there's one more thing to watch, because now he's going to take into the crosshairs China. If you like this kind of analysis and stuff that you just don't get on any other channel, be sure and like and subscribe. Really helps us out a lot. Let's take the comment here about China is now going to be upset because these sanctions that Lindsey Graham is talking about, that Blumenthal and some in the House are talking about, is if this, you may recall earlier this week, Trump said something about maybe within 2 weeks, I'll know if I'm being tapped along, and then I may take different actions. Well, Lindsey Graham is ardently and passionately pushing for some of those actions to be a new round of sanctions, one of which is a 500% tariff on anybody who does business with China, with Russia, especially in the area of oil. So he's trying to say, let's put a 500% tariff on China. By the way, that would also include our good friend India. Not sure what he's going to do with that one. I'm not sure how eager the Indians are going to be to have this tariff put on them as well, because they do get oil and gas and other things from Russia as well. So what he may find out is that there's not a lot of people willing to engage in that. And what you're going to end up doing is driving us away. But let's just look at the surface of it. Let's just say that he did put those sanctions into apply. Trump did sign the law and it went into effect. Now, Trump has been having just hell on wheels time to try and figure out all these tariffs and the tariffs on, tariffs off, up, down, middle, somewhere else, out, and then back up and then back off. All kinds of chaos going on with that already. During the time when we had 145% tariffs on China, it had significant ramifications already with supply chains, with equipment, with some things that were being bought, certain things that were manufactured in China by American companies that were manufactured over there. It's already started to raise prices. It's already happening still. They're trying to negotiate some things away. They've lowered the tariffs from that big rate, but in different categories, there's still some substantial tariffs on there, which are having still ramifications for American businesses right now. I think the bottom rate is 10%, but there's some categories that are higher, some as much as 50%. And then now, last night, actually, Trump said he's going to put a 50% tariff on any imported steel, which could have additional problems coming in from China, et cetera. That's something that already has negative implications for us, for our population. Now, you want to blow 145% out of the water with a 500% tariff? I mean, that's just insane. We're the ones that are going to be hurting from that. We're the ones that are that's going to be causing a lot of problems too. And let's get back to at least what he claims is the purpose of this: to bring Russia to its heels, to force Putin, because this is something that Zelensky's been saying ad nauseum for many weeks now, is that we need to force Russia with sanctions and other pressures so that he'll accept a just and lasting peace, i.e. back to what Blumenthal, I think, said earlier, basically just surrender and everything's going to be cool. And that's just not going to happen. And so you don't have to take my word for it. Let's look at the historical record. Let's go all the way back to March. I don't remember if it was March the 1st, but it was March of 2022, where President Biden made very, very similar claims.
We're also taking a further step of banning imports of goods from several signature sectors of the Russian economy, including seafoods, vodka, and diamonds. And we're going to continue to squeeze Putin. Putin is an aggressor. He is the aggressor, and Putin must pay the price. He cannot pursue a war that threatens the very foundations, which he's doing, the very foundations of international peace and stability, and then ask for financial help from the international community. And as I said at the beginning of all these steps, we're going to hit Putin harder because the United States and our closest allies and partners are acting in unison. And the totality of our sanctions and export controls is crushing the Russian economy.
Yeah, boy, that's going to scare Putin. It's crushing the Russian economy. It's going to cause them all kinds of, how did that work out? Here is in the latest full year economic performance in 2024. We find out that, in fact, the European Union grew by an anemic 1% in 2024, and the Russia's GDP growth is at 4.3%. And by the way, I don't know if you know right offhand, if anybody can just throw in the comments there, what was America's economic performance in the first quarter of this year? Oh yeah, negative growth. We shrank. Now, you want to be talking about we're going to cause the Russian economy to cripple when you have now 3.5 almost years of examples to where the Russian economy grew 4 times faster and 4 times better than the Europeans, and all of these bounce back or rebound sanctions or the rebound effects on these sanctions have harmed the Western European countries. Our own economy is at the potentially could be in an official recession when the next quarter has come out. If it comes out with negative growth again, then by definition you have one, but it's anemic at the very best. And you want to talk about how you're going to crush them. And, and this just shows over and over how Lindsey Graham has been so wrong. One of the things that bugs me more than anything on mainstream news medias, et cetera, is that they're keen to put mics in the guy's face like Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal here. This is, I want to say, the 9th or 10th visit that those two guys, at least Lindsey Graham specifically, has made to Ukraine. And they always make all these big grandiose statements. But how come it is that when they made these statements here, there weren't reporters in the pool who were holding those microphones that says, about the past, I remember on these dates you said this and that and the other thing, and none of those things happened. Why should we listen to you now? Put the mic back in. No one does that. In fact, they just let them speak. They just regurgitate what's said and we move on. So anyone who's watching who doesn't watch a show like the one you're watching here, so you're about to know because you've seen us do a lot of that anyway. But now I'm going to put it all in context here. So let's go back to the same month that Biden made that comment there in March 2022 and see what Lindsey Graham said in March of 2022.
If Ukraine falls to Putin, it will set in motion dire consequences for us as a nation. China will get the signal that they can take Taiwan. The Iranians will believe that we have no will to stop their nuclear ambitions. The converse is true. If the Chinese see the world rally around Ukraine and the rule of law being applied to Putin's war crimes, maybe they won't go into Taiwan. The only thing I can say when it comes to Putin, it needs to be personal. He could care less, in my view, about his own people, and certainly could care less about the Ukrainian people.
Oh, snap. Speaking of not caring less about the Ukrainian people, and speaking of that, there it is again, the international rule of law, which we will follow when it benefits us and we'll throw it in the trash when it doesn't. So stop with this nonsense about talking about international law because you could care less about it. Stop talking about caring about the Ukrainian people because you don't. Because you heard him there. He wants to make it personal. It's a personal issue with him and Vladimir Putin. So he'll do whatever he thinks he can to harm Putin, and it doesn't matter who pays the cost. And I've said this many, many times here, and it is really appropriate right here to point it out, that the actions of Lindsey Graham and the others that support him, certainly President Biden before, and although Trump has the ability to turn this off, and I certainly hope he does, at least through 4 months of his term, he hasn't done anything to change the calculations, that you are harming the Ukrainian people by enabling them to continue fighting, but that there's no capacity. It doesn't matter how much stuff you give. They're never going to be able to win for so many reasons we've recounted in the past. So by doing that, you cause Ukraine people to die by the tens of thousands every month. And I mean, the numbers are stark and they're cruel and they're unquestioned. That's the case here. So I don't want to hear any more about, you're talking about you care about the Ukrainian people. The other thing that he mentioned there, which was, I mocked this at the time because it was self-evidently untrue. He's regurgitating the domino theory from the Vietnam War. If Vietnam falls, then we're going to have all these communists are going to spread all over the world. Okay, the communists did win. Nothing else was spread. Everybody understands now that the conditions that exist in various countries exist for those countries. And that's exactly the same thing we have today. The idea that China and Iran and North Korea are going to be watching what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war. And man, if Putin ends up winning, then we're going to launch off over here. That's stupid. I'm sorry, I'm a little impolitic here, but that's what it is, because the Chinese are going to make whatever decision the Chinese are going to make based on the conditions in the South China Sea between them and Taiwan and the balance of power in the Asia Pacific area. They're going to be watching what's going on over here, and I'm sure they find it interesting. They're learning things about military, et cetera, but they understand that the conditions over there are the conditions over there in Europe. And the calculations and the cost benefit ratios, et cetera, of all the various players has to do with that place. They don't carry on over here. There's a whole different set, number one, of players, and there's a different set of cost benefit factors and calculations. So those two don't go together. I don't know if he doesn't understand that, or if it's just a rhetorical tool that he wants people who also don't know to just believe him and trust him because he's a U.S. senator and there's always a microphone in his mouth. Maybe that's what it is, but I don't know. But if you're watching Daniel Davis Deep Dive, I can tell you for a fact that he is dead flat wrong, and he has been proven wrong, because none of the stuff that's happened over here has had anything to do with over there. China, by the way, as we're going to talk about it in a show tomorrow, actually, there is a lot going on over in the South China Sea and in the Asia Pacific area, and that has everything to do with the conditions on the ground there, as you're going to see. So something to pay attention to. Has nothing to do with what's going on over here. Well, that's not the only time he was wrong. In fact, I don't have time to give you all the things he was wrong, but I'm going to show you a handful of when he has been just catastrophically wrong on some of the most important issues here. And again, for any of our media colleagues who may be watching this, and I know that there's starting to be a few, ask these questions the next time you see Lindsey Graham. Say, why should we listen to you here when you were wrong in 2022 on this whole domino theory thing? And by the way, you're wrong in 2023. And in this case, you may recall the Bakhmut. We've talked about that a lot here. You know how that ended. So a little spoiler alert. He's going to talk about that. And then this is in May of 2023. So 1 month before the start of the Ukrainian offensive. One quick note to point here. In the same month, and actually also in April of 2023, I wrote in the publication 1945 that it would be a disaster if Ukraine launches an offensive because it's not going to succeed. I pointed out all the reasons why. They were clearly evident on the ground that it was going to be a disaster. Yet, here's what Lindsey Graham said.
But I expect in the coming days and weeks for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to yield results. And I'm here to tell you that the last chapter of the Battle of Bakhmut is yet to be written. I'm here to tell you that the Russian military is about to have holy hell unleashed upon them.
Holy hell unleashed upon them. How did that turn out? Exactly the way any sober and military analysis would have told you before it happened. That they broke their teeth on the first line. And just real quick to recap why, that's to show you how self-evident it would have been if you had had your eyes open and knew anything, is because Ukraine had insufficient engineering assets. They had insufficient training on combined arms operations. They had insufficient ability to understand how especially in offensive operations, the drone issue was going to be. And because they didn't have engineering support, they were unprepared to breach minefields. And then maybe most of all, they didn't have air defense and air offense capacity. So they're trying to take these complicated breaching operations with not enough engineers to get rid of the mines, almost no air defense or very little, and no positive air force to go and put pressure on the Russian side there. It was doomed to failure, and it did at a great cost to Ukraine. They got the first to 5 Russian defensive lines, broke their teeth on that, didn't even fully penetrate that one line, and then it was spent. That's just the bottom line. That's a fact. And if you watched our show yesterday, I showed you a graphic that showed that the Ukraine side did capture some territory because it was a very broad-based offensive. It just inched along, and I want to say it was 4 months worth. And by September of 2023, that's the last month that they actually gained any territory back from Russia. From that point and to this day, everything has been going in the negative direction. They have been losing all of it. And that's just where we are today. And in that same month, when the offensive culminated, we can now tell you conclusively when that was. It was September 2023. You had Lindsey Graham go back out one more time and talk about what a great deal this is for the United States.
People ask me, is it worth it? Here's what we've gotten for our investment. We haven't lost one soldier. We reduced the combat power of the Russian army by 50%, and not one of us has died in that endeavor. This is a great deal for America.
You've previously said that it's the best money we've ever spent. That's still true?
Since we helped Churchill stand up to the Nazis.
That is just bizarre in any way you want to characterize it. This isn't even about a bad projection. This is with the wreckage of all the stuff that he had been highlighting in May behind him, still smoldering on the battlefield, a complete and utter disaster. He has the audacity to say, best money we've ever spent, and then flat out lies and said, we have reduced the Russian capacity by 50%. It wasn't that you hadn't reduced it by 50% at that time, because Russia had been suffering losses without question, but they had also already started by that time rebuilding their forces and to start sending in even more capabilities, producing more ammunition, more armored vehicles, more aircraft, more helicopters, all that kind of stuff. That had already started by that time. So it wasn't really reduced by 50%. Today, Russia is 50% bigger than they were when the offensive started in February 2022, just by the numbers, despite all the losses that they've had. And there's been a bunch of reports that were out today that claims that Russia has lost maybe 500,000 men altogether, killed and wounded. I don't have any idea what the actual number is. I know it is substantial because we've heard about it from some of the Russian people that we've talked to on this very show. They say they are suffering casualties. Don't know what the number is, but it is high, whatever the number is. But despite all of that, and let's just for the sake of argument, use that number, it's 500,000. That means that Russia is now 500,000 bigger as its armed forces on active duty than it was in February 22, which tells you that they have probably recruited about 1 million people to replace the losses and then build up on top of that, so that now the net is a plus 500,000. That's the fact. You want to brag about that? Secretary Austin, also former Secretary of Defense early in the war, said one of our objectives is to weaken Russia. That's what it is. We wanted to harm them. Biden was talking about we want to harm their economy, et cetera. And we see what happened. The economy has grown. Ours has shrunk. The Russian military has grown, and it's not just in numbers. It's not just in terms of how many people they have, but in their capacity as well. I've seen a couple of good interviews here of late. One by Dmitry Simes Jr., and he was interviewing a Russian journalist who was also somebody who either had fought or now fighting. I can't recall the sequence of there, but somebody who's been basically on the front lines in one form or another since 2014. I think first as a journalist and now as a fighter. And he was very candid in his efforts. He didn't sugarcoat anything, talked about their losses, talked about the horrendous things of war. So there's a lot of validity to this, because what he said, again, lines up with what we can generally see on the ground there. But one of the things he really pointed out to, he said that the Russian and the Ukraine armies right now are the best in the world. They gave props to their opponent because obviously they're fighting ferociously. And even though Russia's continuing to advance because they have the capacity that dwarfs all the things that the Ukraine side does, they still fight ferociously. But he said all the Western armies, any other armies in the world for that matter, don't have the experience. They haven't gone under fire for how these battles are fought. And until you're underneath that withering artillery fire and the drones that are constantly over your head, blowing up stuff left and right, missiles going in the deep, you have no idea how that would work and how you need to fight on that. It's not a theoretical issue. It is very, very hard to figure out. Thanks to Lindsey Graham's efforts, those are what's continuing on to this day. So the balance continues to go in the wrong direction for us. If that was your objective before, it's now going the other direction. More of the stuff you do here is going to continue to move that balance in the wrong direction on our side. Okay, so one more on this, and that is in August of 2024. So it's like one per year that we've chosen. Could have been a lot more, unfortunately. But this is in August of last year, when the Ukraine side had launched its ill-fated Kursk operations. As you may recall, we have repeatedly told you did at the time that they're dead man walking. It has no chance to succeed. All it's going to do is get a lot of people killed, and eventually it's going to be driven out, and it's going to be as though they were never there. Well, it turned out to be a little bit worse than that, but Lindsey Graham, showing his military prowess, said this.
What I think about Kursk, bold, brilliant,
Beautiful. Keep it up. Putin started this, kick his ass. Bottom line is to the administration, I appreciate your support. Let these people fight. Give them weapons they need to win a war they can't afford to lose.
He was so happy that day. I mean, he's grinning ear to ear. He just said, yeah, kick his ass. Yay, Russia got hurt today. Again, because he's made it personal. He made it personal. So when he saw that Russian territory had been invaded and that the Russian people were now suffering the ravages of war, that thrilled him beyond measure because it is personal with him. But as I said earlier, he is completely undeterred and unmoved by the cost to the Ukraine side, because at least 75,000 Ukrainians were killed. Could have been more than that. Again, the numbers are, no one's going to know for probably years until all the files are opened up in the future. So we don't know, but it's a large number. A large number on top of that were wounded. Thousands of combat vehicles of various types were destroyed inside that Kursk operation there. So there was a tremendous cost to the Ukraine side. And as a consequence of that, on the Eastern Front, where the Russians were continuing their press, because the Ukraine side had to withdraw forces from there to be able to maintain the offensive up here, more Ukrainians died here. So their casualties went up here because the density of their manpower continued to shrink. Well done, Lindsey. Good job. You talk about you want to make it personal for Putin. I think that to a certain extent, Putin may be laughing about this and saying, cool, keep it up, Lindsey. You're one of my best assets. You're helping Russia more than you can even imagine. You're harming Ukraine worse than anybody else because you facilitate a war that can only lead to the death and destruction of the very people you claim to champion. That's just the reality of it. You can see it graphically playing out. Not hard to figure out here. And yet, he wants to try and just continue on with this same nonsense and this arrogance, this hubris on display on the cameras yesterday. And people keep putting those microphones in their faces, and it's just really, really disheartening. And, you talk about just the 75,000 dead, but now we're looking at what's going to come next. Instead of doing what makes sense, what's rational, and ending this war, taking the ugly deal that's on the table today, which the Russians to this day still, there's supposed to be a meeting on Monday. There's supposed to be a meeting in Istanbul, which as of airtime today, I still haven't seen confirm whether or not the Ukraine side is going to accept it. But the Russians said they're going to show up in Istanbul on Monday, and hopefully the Ukraine side will. At least they're talking. I mean, let's find any positive you can on that. The only wise thing to do, the only sane thing to do, if you care about Ukraine, is to reach a negotiated settlement on whatever terms you can get. And they'll be ugly. There's no question about it. But they can be had. Because if you don't, then you're going to get the alternative. And again, don't take my word for it. There's no analysis here. This is just a repetition. You had the ambassador for Russia at the UN Security Council a couple of days ago point blank say, we will either achieve our objectives in negotiations or we will decisively win on the battlefield. He said it straight up. No ambiguity there. No diplomatic language. As blunt as you can be. That is where we are. The Russians now are openly saying it. They're not even trying to hide any of these things. It's open and they're doing it. They're having this offensive operation. The other big consequence of this Kursk operation is that it invited Russians into the Sumy province. Before that, they weren't in there. Now then, they're rolling south toward the city. They've taken a number of villages here in the last few days. More and more territory is continuing to move south. And by all accounts, that's going to accelerate. In the Kharkiv area, that's going to accelerate. And several others too, possibly even the Chernihiv region. So that's a whole northern front is already open, and the eastern front continues to move as well. Everything is going in the negative direction for the Ukraine side, and instead of recognizing that, you have the likes of Lindsey Graham, Senator Blumenthal, continue to advocate for things that just make no sense whatsoever, that have been proven to be utterly failed on the battlefield. And again, don't miss this. If the Russian side, which started disastrously in 2022, were able to overcome all those mistakes, were able to improve their forces, were able to offset the losses and continue to grow, and then they're on the offensive all over the place, and the Ukraine side doesn't have the manpower, the economic potential, or the production capacity to even match what this. The only thing they can do is they match in the drones, and that's substantial, but it's not enough. It's like 1 out of 6 of the main areas. All the other 5 are decisively on the Russian side. So if you stick with what Lindsey Graham is saying, if you listen to him and all the people that are, many of them are on his side, and God help us all if he convinces President Trump to do this in a couple of weeks and to put on these new sanctions and to not compel the Ukraine side to reach a negotiated settlement or just withdraw all of our support and leave it up to them to do whatever they deem best at that point. That's the only thing that's out of mercy. That's the best thing they could do for the people of Ukraine. It remains to be seen whether that's going to happen, but this is the course that's set before us right now. This is what we have achieved. This is what passes for elite thinking in the Western world, especially in the United States. Celebrating things that are disaster, oblivious to the fact that their proposals have no chance of success and a high probability of utter failure. And it's worked out that way. And now you have a huge track record of performing, of all those things coming to pass. And that doesn't slow down the nonsense that we saw in Kiev yesterday. And obviously Zelensky is loving it, because he's detached from reality as anybody can be. So this just feeds him. It's literally, it's like an intravenous drug into Zelensky's arm when Graham comes over and says those kind of things, because that feeds his delusion. And it just continues to feed the meat grinder at the front lines, because Zelensky will just keep sending men to certain death. That's just how it is. It's ugly. It's unpleasant, but that's where we are, folks. And I think that you need to know the truth, because we're unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you whatever the truth is, no matter what it is. That's where we're at. We do have to hope, and I do hold out some hope that at least President Trump is still in the decision-making process, and he has signaled that he's going to do something in a couple of weeks. We'll see if he does. I think that whatever comes out of this meeting here in Istanbul, assuming that it happens on Monday, could go a long way towards pushing him into a decision-making process. Because I don't think he wants to just stumble along and drag it out and do nothing and let events take over. I think he's going to try to take some action pretty soon. And if he sees, and if his advisors tell him about things that we've talked about here today, and he sees that if he stumbles along or does what Lindsey Graham is going to have, then he's going to have his name all over the failure. That might prompt him to do what we've suggested, that he withdraw and says, you guys are on your own now, and finally does the walk that he's been talking about here. We'll see how all that happens. You can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to continue to bring it to you as it happens. And if anything happens in between now and then, we'll bring that to you as well. And in the meantime, have a great Saturday. We'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.